5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
You're listening to Working Forward, presented by Symetra, in partnership with NASA Reimagined. In this limited podcast series, hosted by Harry Monty, Laura Dinan-Haber, Paul Tyler, and Todd Zen, we explore the future of work from a variety of viewpoints and discuss the challenges and opportunities ahead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Working Forward podcast. We are so pleased that you have joined us as we continue our conversation about the future of work. Very excited to get into our topic today. We're going to be talking about HR tech. This is a robust field, obviously very much on our theme here. It's powering the future of work. We've got three fantastic guests, two CEOs and co-founders, and we have a general expert coming to us from the venture capital world. So really excited to bring them in. But before we do, as always, I want to introduce my co-hosts, first starting with Harry Monty, Head of Benefits at Symetra. Hi, Harry. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Todd. Thanks. Looking forward to it. As you said, some great guests.
Wonderful. And we also have our friends from NASA Reimagined, although like last time, we're actually down one of them. Unfortunately, Paul Tyler couldn't join us, but very pleased to have Laura Dinan-Haber back on the show. Laura, hi. Welcome.
Hey, it's great to be back, and I look forward to today's conversation.
Wonderful. So now let's bring on our guests. So I want to start by welcoming Allison Baum-Gates. She is a general partner at Sempervirens Venture Capital. Allison, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Next, we've got Jessica Kin. She is co-founder and CEO of Ianacare, which is a platform for family caregivers. Jessica, hi. Welcome to the show.
Hi, excited for this conversation.
Wonderful. Us as well. And next, we've got Joanna Strober. She is co-founder and CEO of Midi, which is a virtual care platform focused on female midlife health. Joanna, hi, welcome.
Good morning.
All right, we've got everybody here. Harry, I'm sure you are chomping at the bit to ask a question, so let me hand it off to you.
Thanks, Todd. And, Allison, I'm going to start with you because you recently published an article titled, What is Going on in HR Tech and the Future of Work? And it was really interesting. Could you just recap some of the insights from that article for our audience? Because I think they're going to be a great underpinning for a lot of our conversation today.
Absolutely. What we've found in a lot of our conversations around HR tech and the future of work is that it's a very confusing time. The pandemic was clearly a platform shift, a real disruption that led to an explosion in innovation, the elevation of the HR function, the renewed emphasis on people as whole beings and not just, butts and seats necessarily. And that was a really exciting time. Venture capitalists were pouring a ton of capital into new technology that was creating solutions for this space, and that was very exciting. But over the past 18 months, the dust has begun to settle, where employers are saying, okay, we tried a bunch of stuff, now we need to figure out what's actually working and what's right for us. And individuals are saying, I changed my whole life around potentially during the pandemic, and now I'm trying to refocus and recenter on what my goals are. And at the same time, we're seeing with the broader economy a huge slowdown and headlines around job cuts, but at the same rising interest rates. But at the same time, employment numbers at the top level are still quite good. We're still at very historically low unemployment. So it's very confusing. And the result has been a general pullback and consolidation in not necessarily reduction in budgets, but instead, I think employers saying, what do I really need? What are my employees asking for? Where can I take 5 solutions and provide one? And for the ones that I am paying for, how can I make sure that I'm getting the most out of it? And so that's kind of where we are, and happy to dive into where we see opportunities or kind of what are the results of that. But I would say we're definitely in a period of practicality and less one of excitement around trying anything new.
So I do have a follow-up question, and I ask you to kind of connect some dots for me, right? Because in the article you talk about the fact that there was a tremendous amount of capital that was being infused into the startups, and HR organizations were making massive investments, in particular in talent acquisition, but that the startups were struggling to get traction with large-scale employers. So, like, can you diagnose that for us? Like, what was happening there with the startups struggling to get the traction?
There was a lot of confusing signal around the fact that early adopters were interested in trying anything. And particularly when it comes to talent acquisition, a lot of new startups use success-driven models where they might not necessarily be charging a fee up front, but it's more if you do hire someone from their platform or if you want to try something out, you only pay if it works. And in particular, technology companies who have been growing very quickly were very early adopters for a lot of this technology because they'll try anything. And when you're moving, into hyper growth, anybody that can solve any problem that you have, especially if there's no upfront cost, you might as well try it out. And so a lot of companies that had gotten initial traction in the technology sector were hit particularly hard by the pullback where the hypergrowth days of technology companies had really slowed. And that has become really confusing for investors and I think for founders as well, where they had that initial traction with small and medium-sized businesses, particularly in the technology sector. They've pulled back and it wasn't necessarily on their radar as a young startup to start working with very large enterprises because you have a lot of technology security requirements, longer sales cycles, bigger contracts, but you can get pulled in a lot of different directions, get asked for a lot of customizations. And so they weren't doing that yet, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not deliberately. But that has been really challenging for the economics of a lot of these early businesses.
So, Allison, if I could jump in, I'm really interested in something in your article where you talk about, this is very relevant to us at Symetra and insurance carriers. You talk a little bit about how employers are thinking about paying for some of these things. So some of these new innovative type benefits and, they're rethinking, is this a cost that the insurance carrier should bear or perhaps even our own employees? And, when I think about the exciting things that Ianacare and Midi are doing, and, we'll talk about that today, how to pay for them though is an important question. And I'm wondering if you could share some of your insights on that.
Over the last few years of hypergrowth, talent was very hard to find and retain. And so employers, at least in our ecosystem, were almost willing to pay for anything because they could realize an ROI in the form of keeping somebody just a little bit longer. And I think there are two things that have happened. One is a lot of employers weren't actually able to realize that ROI because turnover naturally has been so high. By choice. It is my belief that we are now in an era where you shouldn't expect people to stay with you for the course of their entire career. That's just not the reality. People don't want that. They naturally shift jobs every 18 months and that cycle is only going to be getting shorter. And that's not as a result of anything employers have done. It's just a result of a more liquid job market and a general cultural shift in terms of what we expect from our employers. So I think there's that piece. And then two, there's also the fact that you can't buy everything for everyone. And there's general point solution fatigue. And so if you have too many solutions and you can't prove what is the actual ROI, the question becomes, who is realizing that ROI? And is there a way for me to provide that benefit to my employees, which is something I really care about, but without necessarily, spending extra out of pocket. So at a high level, I think that's what we've been seeing. And when it comes to both women's health and caregiving, it's very clear that there's an ROI there and that those are very, very, needed solutions. And why are employees leaving their employers? There's the reasons you can control and there's the reasons you can't control. And what I mentioned around just general cultural shifts, you can't control that. But if somebody's leaving to take care of a loved one or leaving because their health is so difficult that they can't show up for work in the way they need to, well, those are very solvable problems. And so we're finding employers are really focused on those two areas in particular.
That's great. And, the whole concept of it, I mean, there's so many questions and so many different ways we could dig into it. But I want to give Jessica and Joanna a chance to tell the audience a bit about their companies. A quick overview would be wonderful. Some detail on how your platforms help power the future of group benefits within this space. The work that you do is fascinating. It's important. So Jessica, let's begin with you. If you could provide a quick overview, that'd be great.
Yeah, great. So Ianacare, we are the front door to navigating all the care in the home for family caregivers. So across all ages, conditions, care situations. And we do that by putting all the layers of support in one clear place. So everything from mobilizing your friends and family to help with meals, rides, respite care, childcare, pet care, house errands, all those everyday tasks, to a full self-search database of over 650,000 local resources. So think all of the social determinants of health resources like transportation, financial aid, rehab centers. And then you cannot keep the human out of this very human experience. And so we do match every single employee up with unlimited access to a human navigator. So this is the white glove, concierge, high touch, right-hand person throughout the entire journey who makes the calls for you. They help you vet the options, and they guide you throughout the entire experience. And so when I think about the future of benefits and the future of, group benefits and work, and Allison speaks a lot about this, there's like a consolidation that's going to happen. When we looked out into the marketplace, we realized that caregiving is defined in such a narrow way. So you often see just a sliver of backup childcare, right? That if you really think about it, is really for preschool age and younger, right? So you're not even caring for all of the childcare needs, or elder care, end of life planning, or something like that. And and so it really made us not create just another point solution, but instead think of Ianacare as the full infrastructure support to navigate all that care in the home in one place to make it most inclusive, the quickest speed to service. And then our approach is very continuous. So we're not case-based. You don't open a case and close a case. Once you engage with us, we proactively guide you to things that you may not even know to ask for. And ultimately, it's embedded in our name. It's IANA of Ianacare, stands for I am not alone. And that's what we do for employees and employers.
I love that. And Joanna?
First of all, I wish I had had that when I had young children. I know you take care of the broad range of things, but I think it would have been incredibly helpful to me. So Midi Health is a midlife care platform for women. And we start taking women around the age of 35 and take care of their health. And what does that mean? It means everything from sleep issues, anxiety, hot flashes, to really more chronic conditions. We are absolutely helping women take care of obesity. We're helping them take care of diabetes. Basically, we can help them on this remote platform take care of really all their health issues from their desk with expert care. And the way we created the company is we went out to the experts in all phases of women's life, and we have created protocols. So we have really high expertise in pretty much all, like 36 different conditions that women experience. And a lot of those conditions are things that actually do make them quit their jobs. So there's a lot of research that shows that 25% of women in this age category think about leaving their jobs because of health issues. And these are absolutely issues that we're able to manage effectively. So it's really the intersection of hormones and just aging. And there's a lot that we can do to make people feel better and be able to be extremely successful in their jobs. So that's really what we're focused on.
Oh, I think that's great. And I appreciate both of you giving us a chance to understand each of your companies a bit more. And I know that we're going to dive deeper as we go into the conversation, but I want to flip the question back over to Allison. And, let's talk about how are employers thinking differently about benefits and supporting employees with resources and services that fall outside of traditional benefit offerings? So I think some of us, 15 years ago would have a sense of these are the traditional benefit offerings. You talked a little bit about, the expectations of employees, how things have changed, retention. Have you seen benefits evolve, especially throughout the last few years, but even just as a broader swath? How has that evolution taken place, and what are some examples of that non-traditional benefit that you see?
So much has changed. It feels almost difficult to summarize in one sentence. I think first of all, we've seen an emphasis on end-to-end solutions, where instead of providing a very specific type of benefit, looking at women's midlife health, for example, as something that is essential, that we need to provide benefits to women that support their entire life cycle and not just one moment in time. And that's helpful, obviously, from from the perspective of keeping them in the workforce. Women were, disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in terms of leaving the workforce. But it also sends a message that we care about you and actually want you to be productive in this role. And so looking at that kind of entire life cycle. And then I think we've also seen the emergence of new categories, mental health, obviously, as one. I think we heard rumblings of that and saw early adopters, particularly in the technology sector, like I spoke about before, adopting mental health benefits for their employees. And then the pandemic really thrust that into more of a core benefit. And we really do believe that expanding the definition of women's health beyond just fertility is another category expansion that we're experiencing right now. And caregiving emerging as a new standard for what employers should be providing. And certainly I come to that position from a bottoms up perspective of, the type of innovation we're seeing, new companies gaining traction in these spaces, what we hear from our ecosystem of people leaders. We run a community of about 150 senior HR leaders at publicly traded companies. And then also what we hear from our partners who are insurance carriers, who are saying, hey, we're starting to pay attention to this category because we're hearing it from our employer customers. And then similarly from the broker community. And so you start to triangulate all those things, and it starts to really become inevitable that there's going to be a new category of a benefit emerging. So we're seeing, both of these areas as very important.
In Allison, how far we've come, right? It's I've been doing this a long time in the benefits space, and I think back to when pet insurance was considered innovation. And
Right.
Don't get me wrong, I love pet insurance. I love my dog. I have pet insurance, but one of the things we've been talking about on this podcast is more of a consumer focus and meeting people where they are with real life problems that help them both with their overall wellness as well as financial security. And as I listen to what you're describing, it's just a huge shift from the way that the industry has thought about benefits in the past. And I love it. It fits right in with what we've been talking about the future of work.
And what I'll say is what I think is so exciting about it is a result of this shifting relationship between employers and employees. I mean, we saw it in the consumer market where you had these big aggregators, right? You had, the broadcast networks, and you had the record studios, and they really chose who was going to be successful because they owned the distribution channel to the end consumer. But with the rise of the internet and new applications, all of a sudden people could choose to read whatever they wanted and watch whatever they wanted. And so that created a direct line between individuals and the creators. And I think we're seeing the same shift happen with employers and employees now, where people have the ability to vote with their feet because you can make money on the internet in so many different ways. And before, it used to be if you wanted health insurance or if you wanted a steady income, you had to have one job at one big company. And that's just not the reality anymore. And sure, there are cycles in terms of, tight labor market or a looser labor market where, there is a little bit of a power shift And we happen to have just gone through a period of time where individuals had so many choices. It was incredibly competitive because people left the workforce and all of that. But I still think ultimately we're on this very, big shift, heading in a secular shift, heading in one direction where employees have way more options. And if you're not giving them what they need, they'll just leave and do something else because they can.
Yeah. And then, to add on to that, because Allison, you talk a lot about like the pandemic has created, this, frenzy of a response, and now it's settling down. But I think there's just on a human level, things that we cannot unsee anymore. Right. So, Joanna, you and I probably always say like, these are not new problems that became
All of
a
a
problem
sudden.
because of the pandemic.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, now I have people to care for. Oh my gosh, now I'm going through, midlife, health issues as a woman. But I think what gets me excited is finally there's this pivotal global point of the pandemic that says, oh my gosh, look at how much has been unseen. And that combined with employees saying, I am no longer going to be okay with you not seeing this part of my life. And my priorities have shifted. So on top of Allison's, point of like, I can make money elsewhere. I'm like, you need to see all of me, right? You see all of me already through Zoom. And so where's that shifting of priority where HR has to take care of their people, but the demands of what people are looking for are really different. And so I think it's a good thing on a human level. And, I love the progress that we see on the HR side. So.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about in a lot of episodes, the role of the pandemic as the revealer, right? It didn't cause these things, but it made them more clear. And, building on all this, Joanna, I'd love to talk with you a little bit more about Midi and what you do. I think it's so inspiring because you do think about the progression here, right? So there was a time when there was really nothing, women's health programs, and then maternity became a focus for good reason. And then, that expanded to infertility, and there was some growth in programs and support there. And that's all wonderful and important stuff. But there was clearly a massive gap in thinking about women's health from a lifetime perspective and, the issues of midlife. And, we heard from employers and brokers in earlier episodes. They are very focused, just in line with this conversation about making sure benefits are reaching their entire populations and making a difference. So, I guess I'm struggling for my question in here because maybe it's more of a comment, but maybe you could just expand on it. What you do is important, and how are employers reacting to it, and what are some of the ways in which your programs are really helping employers help their employees throughout their entire lifetimes.
Yeah, so, I think one of the things that's happened in the last few years, and I don't know how pandemic related this is women have realized that the healthcare system has kind of ignored them for a long time. And, we look at this care gap and we think it's pretty significant. There was money to be made in birth. And so a lot of the resources went to where the medical system made money, which is through in babies. That's where they mostly get compensated. Only 10% of all OBGYNs are trained in menopause care, and 50% of counties in the United States don't even have an OBGYN. So when you look at those numbers, you realize that there's this massive gap of care for this age population. And then you might think, well, why do employers care about that? Well, this is a very effective part of their workforce. This is the women who have been loyal, have been trained, are leading the teams that they need. It's really a core part of their career in their 40s and early 50s. And it's during that time of life when these health things start to happen to them that really can derail them. And so what the employers that we're talking to realize pretty clearly that if they can intervene quickly when someone has stopped sleeping or is starting to having anxiety attacks or having any other number of symptoms. You may not know that joint pain can be terrible, and that's related to women's health. So we can treat these things, and then we can enable people to be very successful at work. It's a really straightforward proposition. The other thing that's actually super interesting is the depression and anxiety issue, which is that employers are overwhelmed by the costs of mental health right now. And a lot of mental health for women is actually misdiagnosed. So when women stopped taking estrogen in 2000, the percentage of them on antidepressants went up 7 times. And so they're being overtreated with therapy and antidepressants instead of the right treatments. So we've actually seen an increase, 70%. We just have this big report that came back that 77% of the women who are using Midi after 2 visits have had significant increase in their mental health. So that's not therapy. It's just getting them on the right medications and having them taken care of the right way. So there's real financial benefits as well as, productivity benefits by just getting people the right care. And also, I would argue pretty strongly that telehealth is the right way to get this care. A lot of people are actually much more comfortable with these discussions on telehealth rather than in person. And so, creating a platform of empathetic caregivers in caregiving mean in our so nurse practitioners and doctors who really understand women's health. It has a lot of benefits. It's not just about the physical health, but it ends up being about the mental health. It ends up definitely making women more productive at work because they're functioning their best, and that's really what employers are looking for.
And at both a micro and a macro level, I think when you have a healthcare provider listening to you and actually, understand your symptoms and not telling you that, oh, you're depressed or there's something wrong with you, or those symptoms aren't real, that leads women to feel better and be more empowered. And at the same time, when employers provide a benefit like Midi or like Ianacare, it also makes their employees feel listened to, which
yes.
even if they don't use it, which they probably will, the fact that the employer can establish that relationship and make it clear that they care about their employees in that way, I think we see a lot of intangible benefit there as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about this podcast is what I learn along the way, right? And so, Joanna, I want to come back to something that what you said. We talk about healthcare deserts all the time, right? The access to care is so difficult across the country. Did I hear you correctly that 50% of the counties in the country don't have an OBGYN?
Yeah.
That is stunning.
Yeah, it's interesting,
Wow.
and it's actually just getting worse.
Wow, that is amazing. It's just the access that these services like yours create for people to help with that, I think is just incredible value. Wow. So can I take us in a little bit different direction? I want to talk about caregiving for a little bit. Allison, you recently wrote in the article that we were talking about earlier that caregiving benefits will be the next need to have for employers. Can you just expand a little bit on that, and then we can have Jessica talk a little bit more about her solution. But love to hear a little bit more about what was behind that comment in your article.
As a venture capitalist, we like to say we're not really that smart. We just process a lot of data points and listen to what people are telling us. And this is me making that statement as a result of the feedback I've heard from the market. I think first from a bottoms up perspective of a lot of HR leaders are part of a sandwich generation themselves, and they're experiencing the challenges around caregiving in both directions for aging parents and for young kids. And when your buyer deeply empathizes with the problem, that definitely changes the game. So there's that kind of bottoms up perspective. There has been an explosion in innovation. We've met dozens of companies who are building solutions for caregiving. So obviously and technology has become an enabler for making that less difficult and for employees everywhere. And then we've also been hearing it from other big stakeholders. So from the broker, insurance carrier community, our fund, we have a lot of our LPs are insurance carriers and brokers. And so they come to us and say, hey, this is our biggest problem right now. And we're looking for innovation in this space. And then we can reach into, our community and sort of the thousands of new companies that we meet every year to try to suggest these are some trends and some solutions that we're seeing. And so we're hearing it from that community too. And so when I put those things together, it just becomes obvious that everybody has started. It was very similar to what we saw with mental health as well, and fertility benefits as well, which I think are kind of two of the big innovations in the benefit world over the last 10 years. And so as a result, really believe that when the world conspires for a new category, it becomes inevitable.
I think Allison's the one who said to me that probably the same thing for Jessica and for our company, that we have something that people want. I think the great thing is when you have a company that is serving a need that is really clearly there and that people really need. It's not an nice to have, but it's actually a requirement in order to sustain in day-to-day life. And, I think certainly caregiving and health are two of those things. They're not really optional.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, let's talk a little bit more about the caregiving. I'm a mother of two, just recently went through caregiving for an 85 plus year old grandparent. So it's interesting seeing both ends of the spectrum and the elements that go into it. They are different in so many ways and they are the same in so many ways. And both of them, they weigh on you. It takes a lot of time and energy and just a lot of your soul, if you will. So I think it would be great for the audience, Jessica, to talk a little bit about how your resources offered through Ianacare can help women manage this. And we've talked about it before. It tends to be an unequal burden, and these challenges tend to disproportionately impact women. So let's dig in a little bit deeper to Ianacare and how the solution can help solve that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's like, what Joanna is doing, what we're doing, it's like one of those things that caregiving is one of those things that every single one of us will be impacted by in some point of our life, right? And like with employers, 61% of employees are going through some kind of care situation where they're doing 24.4 hours of caregiving on top of their full-time jobs. And every woman's going to go through midlife health, right? And so, especially for women, trends are changing. I will say we serve a lot of male caregivers, and I love seeing that change happen, but it still disproportionately falls on women. And there have been studies where even the type of care that a woman does versus a male caregiver, it's fascinating. So if you read the research, female caregivers tend to do a lot of the physical care, the cooking, the cleaning, the actual care, bring them to the appointments. And then male caregivers tend to do a lot of the finance, the coordination, the administrative tasks and things like that. And so when you think about that conflicts directly with work, right? Women, it's harder to outsource really all of that physical aspects of care, right? It's harder to find services that do that at the same time that we can work. And so, it's really critical when we think about caregiving, one, to view and understand the holistic nature of it, that it's not just an administrative tasks, like having, assistant is just not enough because there are whole other aspects of care. And so for Ianacare, we cover the full spectrum of needs. So we do make those calls. We do the financial guidance for you. We will call your insurance. We'll do the paperwork, but we also ensure that we take care of you as a caregiver, one, finding support for that more in-person, high-touch care options. And then we realize that women try to do it all. Like we often are default parents. And so our view, is that not only do you have to take care of that female caregiver on the clinical navigation side for their care recipient, but care for her as a whole person. So we mobilize, Laura, you have 2 kids, we would say, okay, your kids are healthy, but let's find rides for them to give you some respite care. Or in order for you to take care of yourself, we also, the whole infrastructure support is also your support system. We integrate all of your employee benefits, your health plan benefits. So whether you're navigating for yourself or your care recipient, it's the same system. So for us, it's this one place to go to take care of yourself and your loved one. And we see you as a whole person, as opposed to just your role as a caregiver for your care recipient. And I think if we take that view, I was one of those stats. We have 32% of caregivers voluntarily leave their jobs because of caregiving situations. And when my mom was thrust into pancreatic cancer, I had 3 kids. They were 10, 7, and 5 at that time. And I, for the first time ever in my career, quit my job to be her full-time caregiver. And it wasn't just because I didn't have the clinical navigation, because I had options. It was just all the other aspects that came along with it. And so in our DNA, we built this system specifically to see, especially that woman who tends to carry it all and that mental load, to really help navigate in a very practical way. And an emotional way. We help with the mental stress and the emotional support that is often overlooked when we think about caregiver support as well.
You know, Jessica, I'm listening to you because a lot of the women who come to us haven't been to a doctor in 4 to 10 years. And it's because they're doing the caregiving that you're talking about. It's actually, we're seeing those same women that they haven't taken care of themselves. And all of a sudden they are getting derailed by some health issues that they weren't expecting. But part of it is that they were taking care of their kids. They were taking them to the doctor or taking their mother to the doctor and not taking care of themselves.
That's right. Yeah, no, and even that's exactly right, Joanna. And there's such an overlap in what we do too when we think about caring for that caregiver, because it tends to fall in that age range. And, I think the latest that I read was like over 36% higher costs on the healthcare side for caregivers because they neglect their own health. And so this is a real problem that needs to be addressed.
And what's so interesting in my mind about, I also have a young child, and what I've learned is that there is no world where you're not going to do these things. Like, you want to do them, you want to do it all. And so what is so compelling about what you've built is that you make it easier. So you can still do it because you might not feel right not doing it. But with support and with, additional help on all those fronts, you kind of grease the wheels and make it easier and faster to do those things so that you can still stay in the workforce and focus. Because at the end of the day, you're going to always choose your family, right? I mean,
and that's absolutely right. Because we realize that when people decide to leave the workforce, it is in that critical moment whether they believe it's possible or not. And that is a fascinating insight, right? And when you're thrust into it, it's emotional. There's so much going on. That moment of thinking, is there any support so this is even possible, is a critical point of that decision, whether they decide to leave or not. So it's that mentality and that possibility, and knowing that something's there to help make it easier, like you're saying, Allison, is the key point.
Yeah, and to pull on the thread of knowing whether or not it's there to make it easier and to make it, can it happen or can it not happen, that pivotal moment. Allison, how can companies leverage HR tech to offer valuable benefits to their entire population? So we've talked about traditionally underserved groups and women. We have the BIPOC communities. How can companies leverage this tech to offer it a full service of benefits to all of their people?
What I find so exciting about HR tech is that it allows employers to make more of what they already have. And, that is certainly what's happening at the micro level, whether it's caregiving or, your current benefits or insurance network. But we saw, and what we've been hearing from employers is just this fatigue on point solutions, because we've had this new conversation around identity as a result of the past few years, which is really exciting. But identities are complex. And as soon as you provide a benefit for women of a certain population, then all of a sudden you have to consider, people that were not born women, or people, that are women of color, or women of color in the southern states, or whatever it may be. But there's a million different types of populations to address. And so the promise of technology, in my mind, is not necessarily, let's create point solutions for each one of these unique populations, because those populations and their definition and scope will always be changing. But instead, how can we use technology to create or to fulfill the promise of what I believe is, personalization, mass personalization, which is, again, kind of looking at what has happened in the consumer market, where you can watch exactly what you want, how you want to watch it, no matter where you are or what you're like, but the same thing for benefits. And so where we get really excited are solutions, HR tech solutions that allow employers to understand what is within their existing networks already, and then properly route and connect individuals to the solutions they need in order to perform better at work. And so there's a lot of exciting innovation on the infrastructure layer that makes that possible. But it is that mass personalization that I think is the promise of HR technology ultimately.
And, I think it's the promise certainly of healthcare technology, quite honestly, right? Like what we're able to do is something you would never be able to do in a doctor's office. Mm-hmm. So we are able to have one nurse practitioner who can treat a woman on 36 different symptoms. She's not trained on that, but we've created our protocols and we have a back-end system for her to reach out to specialists. So if it's something comes in about bone health or brain health, or you wouldn't believe the spectrum of things that people are coming to us with, then there's an expert on the back end who's able to answer those questions. So we're actually able to use technology to provide actually much higher quality medical care than you would get in a doctor's office.
So I want to dig a little bit more into, Joanna, Jessica, a kind of a question and first a comment for you guys, building on the theme that Jessica, you mentioned about the tremendous overlap between what you both do. And, ostensibly you're solving different problems, caregiving and, women's health and middle age, but they're clearly linked. And maybe that's not fair. It's probably a societal issue if you think about it, but ultimately it's inspiring that you both are helping with these very real challenges that people face with your products. But I do have a question in here outside of the comment. And, it's something that Harry and I talk about a lot in our role in group benefits and partnering with great companies like yours. When we deliver these things through the workplace, they're only as valuable as the degree to which people use them. And utilization is so key. So with you both on the front lines of this, delivering something valuable, but also trying to get people to use it, I'd love to get your insights on, what are some of the best practices? What have you noticed about utilization? How can you make what you do most valuable to employees? Maybe Joanna, we could start with you.
So for us, it really begins with education. So our promise is expert health care for women and the best expertise available. So the way that we have found marketing it to the best, getting it is to do webinars for the population. We did one recently for an employer and they had 2,500 women show up. It was the most they'd ever had show up for a webinar. And we bring our experts, we bring the physicians and they answer questions and then people are interested. So we really start with the education and start with the expertise. And we found that's for us is a very effective strategy of getting the word out.
Yeah. I love that, Joanna. I think there's a lot of shared tactics we probably use because there's still a stigma attached to what we both do, right? Especially in the workplace. People aren't openly saying, who they're caring for and how difficult that is or, what they're going through on the health side. And so what we've discovered is that you have to first start with establishing a psychological safety. I know I love how that phrase is coming out more and more, but it's setting this environment where people feel like they can even show up to the webinars or have these chats or conversations without being judged. And a key way that we've done it is, through vulnerable leadership, like having the leaders join our webinars and share their caregiving story. And over again, that has opened up the floodgates of just having people say, wow, if my VP can share that, I'm welcome to share that as well. And it's something that I saw on the maternity side, early in, my own career, when I saw a leader share about her early kind of pregnancy and going through that, I felt like I was empowered to do the same. And so, we sum it up in saying, don't create necessarily buzz, but create community. And so a lot of our tactics are around, even when we have a webinar, we make sure that everyone on the webinar interacts with each other and then they share it with other people. They come back repeatedly and you start building this community within, because then that sets the ground for then all the other tactics of emails and reminders. Those are all channels of tactics. But if you don't have that foundation of engagement, those emails will not be opened.
Yeah, you both just mentioned something critically important, education, but also breaking the stigma. We talk a lot in our own culture about breaking the stigma around things like mental health and leadership vulnerability and sharing stories. And it is very impactful. And I want to tie this back to something that's come up in several of our podcast recordings, and that is the difference in the generations that are in the workforce today. And so, mass personalization has come up. We talked about the difference between male and female caregiving. Like we're starting to kind of go around the edges of talking about the different ways in which people handle this. I'm curious, in particular, Jessica, when you think about how people are using your services, are you seeing a significant difference in the way that the generations that are providing caregiving are utilizing the services that you provide?
Yeah, there are just overarching generational differences. And it's fascinating because one employer can have over 3 generations, right? Yeah. And working together, and, what type of caregiving they're going through can be different. And so this is kind of what we talked about, the mass personalization, a key thing and the differentiator for our platform is we empower employees with choice. Because some may want to just hop on a phone call and just talk to a navigator. Others will not want to talk to a navigator at all, and they still want value. And so there are a lot of solutions that I saw out in the market where you have to talk to a navigator and there's no self-serve aspect at all. And I equate that to, like, remember when we used to call 411 to say what the local pizzeria was? We all joke and laugh at that because we would never do that now that we have Yelp, right? So I think we have to get away from the fact that healthcare or care always has to be human based, because that's not always the most efficient or the way we want to interact. But there are differences in that, for some personality, age, type of care situation, what stage you are in that care journey. And so having the ability to give people choice across all of those different factors makes it more inclusive.
And I think that actually ties back to this question of best practices around, how to drive utilization. Is what I've seen is, when it comes to benefits, your customer and your user is different, and that can be really confusing. And so what we see, both of you have done this, and a lot of our more successful companies in the benefit space have done this as well, which is you sell contracts to employers, but you market your problem to consumers. And, people might want to engage in those benefits in different ways, but they all have the same problem. And when they know that they should be turning to their employer for a solution, then that's where the magic happens. And, I think with a lot of celebrities talking about the challenges of caregiving in women's health, and a lot of big names starting to bring up these concepts in the broader media, it might seem strange that if an employer is your customer, you still need to market to the end employee, but ultimately creating that awareness around the problem is what can drive those two pieces together, which ultimately results in great utilization of the solutions that people really need.
Well, this has been a fantastic dialogue. Before we close, I want to ask Harry or Laura, my co-host, do you have any final questions or comments for our audience or our guest today?
No additional questions, but I will make a closing comment. Todd, you used the word earlier, inspiring. This has been a very inspiring conversation, and Jessica and Joanna, thank you for doing what you do, right? Bringing these critical consumer needs to the marketplace and solving them. And Allison, to your company for enabling that. So just a fantastic conversation from my perspective.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss. I know that we're at top of time here, but each of you has such a unique story that I'm going to have to ask you my favorite question. And Joanna, let's start with you, then Jessica, then Allison. But I need to know, what is your why? You wake up every morning and you do the work you do, and it's so important. But why is that?
Oh my goodness. For me, it's the feedback from the patients. I've been waking up every day to getting notices on LinkedIn, either from men saying that I had helped their wives and thanking me, which are some of the most fun. But I got one the other day saying that she thinks that Midi saved her life. I mean, it's really powerful when you can get the right woman, the right medical care. It is transformational, and it's very rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, same for me. I mean, it's the impact that we have individuals' lives, their families' lives, and then, every partner that we work with. And then I think on the macro level, so much is being shifted to the home, more and more. All the hospital care is being shifted in the home, and yet there's no infrastructure. So I feel this responsibility because I feel like we can do it, and we're uniquely positioned to build that infrastructure that the industry hasn't been able to do yet because of the technology and the human side of it, and AI and all the other things that are coming about. I feel like we're uniquely positioned to do what's a tsunami that's going to hit us even in a bigger way in the next 5 to 10 years.
And for me, it's really around this idea that there has to be a better way. The way that we work sucks. We're not making any more money than we did several generations ago. People are far unhealthier. And when work sucks, everything sucks. And technology has brought us so much in our all aspects of our lives, and it still has not yet truly, I think, made our work lives better. And that's just what gets me up every day, is like, it just has to be better. We can do better.
Well, I can't think of a better way to close. Laura, thank you for the great final question. Harry, thank you as always. And Joanna, Jessica, it was such a pleasure learning about your companies and the great work you do. Allison, your holistic insights on HR technology were extremely valuable. So I want to thank our audience. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed having the conversation. Please keep an eye on your podcast feed. We will be back with more episodes of Working Forward soon. Until then, we're signing off on this episode. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Working Forward, Future of Work podcast series. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Symetra Life Insurance Company or its affiliates. The host is not affiliated with Symetra Life Insurance Company and/or any of its affiliates and is solely responsible for the content.